Good afternoon to all of you. As Asha said, I'm Kanti Bajpai, and I teach political science and international relations at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at NUS. This conference is, as you know, on India-ASEAN engagement and cooperation looking ahead, a subject obviously whose time has come, given the terrific turnout in all the sessions that we've seen so far. And so much of the discussion on India-ASEAN tends to be either on geopolitics, what the two societies or sets of societies can do to bring about peace and stability in Asia, and that's kind of my subject, or on economics, perhaps even more importantly on economics, on issues of trade, finance, and business interactions. I would suggest that not enough attention has been paid to the place of intellectual collaboration between the two partners, particularly in higher education and the relationship between higher education and, of course, private institutions, particularly business. I put it to you that India and ASEAN have areas of great strengths in intellectual life. Perhaps unrealized is their partnership. The one exception, I would say, is Singapore and India, which have leveraged their strengths and their relationship to quite a large extent. We at the school, for instance, have a very large contingent of Indian students and Indian faculty as well, and of course from other ASEAN countries. But India and Southeast Asia more broadly have perhaps only just begun their journey. What can India and ASEAN do together? This is an area that's relatively free of the weight or inertia of governments, and I think that suggests that potentially looking ahead, there are huge opportunities. Public and private higher education institutions can do a lot with each other as the business communities are. And so, of course, there are opportunities here, it seems to me, perhaps as unlike other areas. Looking ahead, if India and ASEAN are to grow economically and move up the value chain, and if they are to be stable and resilient politically and socially, they need ideas and products. They need science and technology that will allow them to be more competitive, and they need social scientific ideas on economic, social, and political issues to maintain stability and resilience. If they don't bring science and technology and ideas to bear, it seems to me they will be caught in either the middle income trap or what we might call a governance trap, a low-level governance trap, with institutions that were built for another time and for different circumstances. Excellence in higher education, therefore, it seems to me, is vital. Universities, with the backing very often of the private sector, certainly of course of the government, produce research, produce innovation in technology, in science, and social scientific ideas that have economic, social, and political application. The advances of the West, of Japan, and increasingly of China come from their higher education. I think this is something that we often lose track of. We talk about the fourth industrial revolution and its implications. If India and Southeast Asia don't join the tech revolution, and if they don't use social science to understand the implications of that revolution for economy, society, and politics, we will not only be left behind, we may face great political and social turbulence. Can India and Southeast Asia cooperate more in science and technology and in the social sciences? What kind of cooperation is possible, plausible? Exchange of ideas, exchange of scholars and students, training each other's young talent. What kinds of developments in India and ASEAN should we be aware of that point towards cooperation, and what are some of the hurdles ahead? I mean, I think these are some of the kinds of questions that I hope the panel, my distinguished colleagues, will present, and that will arise in discussion. I propose to proceed in the following way. The panel's been introduced, so I won't repeat that. We're going to go in alphabetical order, And we'll speak each for about 5 minutes at the podium, and then we'll come back to our seats and open up for Q&A of 30 minutes. We have about 4 or 5 minutes at the end, and I'll be fairly ruthless about time. We will come back to the panel maybe for a summative remark of about a minute each. I particularly want to thank Rakesh Mittal, who joined us at the last moment. Thank you very much for doing this, as Dr. Deep Kapuria, unfortunately, was not able to be here. Going alphabetically, that places me first, which is... I want to say something about the area that possibly most of us don't think so much about, which is cooperation in social science and public policy thinking, which is, of course, my thing. And I'm really going to address 2 areas very quickly. First of all, why India and ASEAN can cooperate in social science and public policy thinking. And secondly, what are some areas that seem to be vital for them to work together in? So first of all, what kinds of reasons are there for thinking that this is a good time for India and ASEAN to cooperate in social science and public policy thinking? Let me advance 3 reasons. Reason 1, I think they're all open societies. India and the Southeast Asian countries, by and large, are, in varying degrees, open societies with all the problems and opportunities and the kinds of institutions that come with being open societies. So I think that's something we all have in common. Reason 2 is that, broadly speaking, and of course, again, there are variations, and Singapore is a great exception, they're at similar levels of economic development and face similar challenges in economics, politics, and society. Reason 3, they are, in comparison to many other parts of the world, even other parts of Asia, young societies. That is to say, with big populations of young, aspirational people below the age of 30. So it seems to me these are 3 very big things in common, which are suggestive of more cooperation in social science thinking, public policy thinking. So what areas could they cooperate in? I'm just going to tick off 3 areas that it seems to me are quite important. I've mentioned the 4th Industrial Revolution, and I think this is the first area that bears thinking about together. India and Southeast Asia have obviously made great progress economically, and they're already thinking about the effects of robotics, artificial intelligence, connectivity, and so on production and competitiveness. Clearly, to move up the value chain, we need technology. But these technologies may displace workers more than they create jobs, and we face the specter down the road of jobless growth. What happens to these young societies when the youth don't have jobs, or jobs that they think that they deserve? So that's one, I think, theme across India and Southeast Asia that social scientists bear thinking about. The second one relates to social integration. Without social integration in these very diverse societies, neither economic policies nor governance will bear much fruit, good governance. And I think in particular, the real challenge for social integration ahead seems to be the role of another technology, which is social media technology. What kinds of effects are social media having on social integration? All these societies now have unprecedented numbers of handphones, computers, access to broadband, and people who are educated enough to use the technology. Do we regulate this media or not? How much? What are the implications for privacy? We need to understand what's going on in this social space very, very rapidly in these societies. And ask the question whether, in a non-paternalistic way, governments and other agents can use the technology to enhance social integration rather than to divide us. Lastly, I come to politics and administration. And again, I think the importance of technology here and questions it raises for social science research and thinking. I'm thinking of the relationship between technology and service delivery that's so important for governance in this age. If good governance means efficient and appropriate service delivery to citizens and residents, you really cannot have good governance, you can't break out of the middle income trap, and you can't manage social integration if you're not efficient and you don't have good service delivery. Can technology help? It already is being deployed extensively in India and ASEAN. Clearly, the way ahead is to go further. And the issue is, can these societies leapfrog the governance stages that more established polities went through? Can technology help us leapfrog? And in doing so, how do we manage the balance between faceless and oppressive governance, at the hands of technology, but at the same time, produce efficient delivery? Okay, let me conclude. I think my time is up. I think because India and ASEAN are at similar levels of development, they can and should study each other and learn from each other. Historically, and this is the subtitle of these sessions, they have learned much from each other going back a long, long time. Disappointingly, over the past 70 years, they haven't looked at each other or learned as much as they could have. I think India thinks that it's too big to learn from smaller societies and its problems are unique. And Southeast Asians who are more open to learning from others have turned mostly to learn from the West and perhaps from East Asia, but not India. This is not a complaint. I don't want to end on the tone of a complaint. I think it's quite understandable that they've taken those routes. But is it desirable? I would say no. I think the time has come for us to turn to each other. Thank you very much. Okay.
Perfect. Perfect.
So let me invite the next speaker, who is Dr. Chaudhary. You're up next, 5 minutes.
So the focus of the present session is on higher education, research, science, and technology. And I need not say how important they are for the development of any country. To my mind, there is one factor that brings all the four together, that is internationalization. So the internationalization, it doesn't mean it is only limiting to India or Singapore or ASEAN. I am referring to the entire world. The main stakeholders of the higher education, as we all know, are students, universities, government, and entrepreneurs. And each of them have their own role to play, and they cannot work in isolation, and they have to work together. Internationalization, which is the consequence of the globalization, offers several opportunities, and for all the stakeholders, including students and universities. And as a result of the globalization, there is a greater cross-border movement of the students, educational programs, and the universities themselves. The result is a big business for the universities and education providers, growing international market for academics, and of course, commercialization of higher education. The international activities of the most universities include study abroad programs for students and providing higher education in the countries where the local resources are limited. And these offer several new opportunities to the students: greater interaction with people of many nationalities from different faiths, cultures, and backgrounds, development of respect and tolerance for the faiths and cultures, opportunity to compete with the best minds in the world and measure oneself to gain confidence, mastering new technologies, and having opportunities for global jobs and business. Universities, which are meant to produce graduates for tomorrow, are supposed to take note of all the changes that are happening and make themselves available for the students in providing the opportunities. For this, of course, universities have to shift from their mindset. Any education providers that are here also have to shift their mindset. They have to think as a globalized world, and they have to train the graduates instead of career for life to the lifetime of careers by shifting from the narrow specialization to a broader base. And students must be trained, learn how to learn, so that they can continue learning throughout their life. They can retool or reskill along the way. Further, instead of training of the mind, we should be able to give them opportunity to develop the individual as a whole. And we also have to ensure that our graduates have the kind of mindset that I can do, this kind of attitude they have to develop. And these qualities cannot be learned in the classroom. They come with the experience. So in other words, the students or the universities, they have to be in a position to travel and contribute to the so-called internationalization. And of course, for all these things, universities have to shift in educating the students from the local settings to the international settings, and it will contribute to respect and value the diversity. So there is a development of the economic partnership with the overseas institutions, particularly to take advantage of the complementarity of the expertise and provide broad-based education and provide diverse learning community, that is, bring the world to the students and bring the students to the world. And of course, they also have to be trained for the co-curricular activities like entrepreneurship and other things. Beyond education, the universities are expected to be focusing on the research and contribute to the technology and science. And of course, research is meant to excite the students. And even in Asia, including Singapore, all universities are internationalizing. Undergraduate study abroad programs are expanding. Double degree programs between the universities are on rise. And the competition for the talent is also going up and up. That is where we can take advantage. And it is not necessary or is not enough by attracting the talent. We also have to nurture and retain them. In all these things, university mindset has to change. And of course, before I conclude, I would like to add here what is that we can do together with the Nanyang Technological University, which I work for, and the ASEAN and India. Of course, we have what is called as the NTU India Connect initiative at the Nanyang Technological University, which brings hundreds of the graduate students to NTU to train them for research and so that they are able to go back and contribute. Similarly, we also organize joint symposia, joint conferences, and so on, and contribute to the internationalization of the higher education, research, science, and technology. And as Professor Subra Suresh has said this morning, we are also pushing towards technology-enhanced education. That is a flipped classroom, education, all these things. We are in a position to cooperate with India and other countries in the region. Thank you.
Next, we have Dr. D Pichette.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Come on, you can do better than this. Good afternoon. Thank you. I just want to make a small correction. If you see, they have put me as director of Sasin Institute of Business Administration in Thailand. But since the program was designed, I have a new position. In November, I was announced to be the president of CEIBS, CEIBS, China Europe International Business School, based in Shanghai. So this is the first time an Indian going to head up an institute of China. So let's see how it happens. Anyway, building on the theme that we hear about, I would call it REST, research, education, science, and technology. If you look at the history and look at the last 500 years, I would describe the last 500 years in three parts. The first phase was a phase of colonialism, where the players were countries. We were ruled by the British, and if you look at most of the ASEAN countries, except with the exception of Thailand, we all were colonies. Then in the late 1700s, the phase shifted from colonialism to capitalism. America was the country promoted that part. And if you look today, I would say this is a century of human capital, or I would describe it as a phase of entrepreneurialism. So from colonialism to capitalism to entrepreneurialism. Now, what does it mean? As an academic, when we look at the educational institution and we think of India, ASEAN working towards building an education platform, that platform first has to focus on knowledge creation. We are in research, we create knowledge. The next part becomes knowledge dissemination. The knowledge we create, we share with the students in the programs. And third part is knowledge certification, because we universities have the right to award the degree. Now, in this part, I think, and Mr. Mittal would add more to it, we need the help of the private sector. I remember when I became the dean of Kellogg School, I had a wish to meet Milton Friedman, who really promoted this idea of capitalism. And the reason I wanted to meet him was he once made one remark, and he said, if you let the government manage that Sahara Desert, in 10 years, there would be shortage of sand. Right, that was his comment. So if you look at today and look at all the universities in US, the top universities are still the private schools like Stanford, Harvard, MIT, and others funded by the private sector. I think under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi, Indian government has also decided, and we all have submitted applications to create universities or institutes of world eminence, which would come from the initiatives of the private sector. I am being part of the university that Mr. Ambani wants to create, and I'm sure Mr. Mittal is one of the players there. We all have submitted proposals, but my point, just to conclude, is time has come for us to work together. The future of competition is collaboration. So how the ASEAN countries with India, we need to create some joint research centers, create some research professorships, and also in different countries, we can focus on different aspects of demographics. Like Thailand can be a good center for consumer wellness. India can be a good center for media entertainment. You can think of other countries being a center for financial side. Some can be on hospitality and tourism. And if we create such centers, then just, I believe in the principle of Mother Nature, cross-pollination, then if professors can move from one to another and write case studies, do research, then those research would be used in the classroom by professors in the western part of the hemisphere. So I really believe that time has come for us to be a part of a team, work together, and just in the late 90s, when China was growing up, we business school deans created a course called Doing Business in China. And that became a very important elective. I am sure that very soon we would create courses called Doing Business in ASEAN Countries and create research which would be respected by the rest of the scholars. Thank you.
Mr. Mittal, if you're ready, you're up next.
Yes.
Okay.
Very good afternoon. So let me first disclose that I'm a rank outsider on this panel. You have heard the intellectuals and the academics, and I am not in the same category or the same league. But having said that, let me just pick up from where Deepak just left. The current higher education ecosystem in India, I believe, is struggling. While we have some institutes who are doing very well, the IITs, the IIMs, the ISB, and a few other, public and private. But primarily, I believe we need to look at next wave of leapfrogging to bringing the higher education in a very different form than what we see today. And as Deepak mentioned about the Institute of Eminence, I think this was something which was struggling, the policymakers were struggling and had a challenge. How to come out with something where you don't have to go and tweak the existing regulation, because then you have to go into the parliament and you have to amend and change the legislation. And this is where Prime Minister Modi's vision came in of setting up the Institute of Eminence. They will be called not universities, but Institute of Eminence deemed to be universities. And the whole purpose was to give freedom to the educational institutions to innovate, to give complete freedom of finalizing the curriculum, the content, the methodology of delivery. So it is unshackling, to my mind, unshackling the higher education system in India. This is just a beginning with 20 institutes which will get this approval or the agreements with the government, 10 in the public domain and 10 in the private. What I was surprised was 100-odd applicants have applied. Last date was 12th December, and Deepak, you remember our brief chat. 70%, more than 70% of 100 applications are from the public sector. Now, to me, this itself speaks something very, highly of that. They also want to get away from the regulation or from the, if I may say, getting approvals and the authority sits, somewhere else. Although there is a catch, because every public university which gets into the Institute of Eminence will get 1,000 crores each, so about $150 million, while the private sector will have to put in their own money. But all said and done, I believe this is the right step, the first and the right step in taking higher education to the next level. What do we lag in India? If I go back to my university or college days when I was doing engineering, in fact, that time we had engineering colleges, and then we had the ITIs, which were 2-year courses. And a unique institute came up with, in collaboration with the German government, YMCA Institute of Engineering, which started a 4-year sandwich diploma course. So in those days, the degree used to be 3 years, and then they put another year for a diploma course, or 4 or 5, whatever. The industry-academia linkage was so great in that institution that after year 1, when we spent the next 3 years, most of the time in the labs, we were addressing the problems faced by the industry, by the local industry. And this is something which I believe is now missing in India. Industry-academia partnership is something which will have to be taken from the very lead and from the very front to ensure that the academia looks at what is required by the industry for the next 5 years. And the industry must go and engage with telling the academia what are their requirements. At the earlier morning session, I did talk about the jobs in future, where we are preparing our students to look at what they need to do after they complete their engineering, software, computer sciences, bio, life sciences, and so on and so forth. I think with the technological disruptions which we see in the world today, and every 5 years is going to be a different world, we need to prepare our students, our young minds for future of jobs. And therefore, I believe that on the education front, on the higher education front, we need to look at experiential learning. The teaching and research, which is a high focus area, also needs to be looked at. If I look at the Western world, and I think India is no different now, more and more focus is being given on research, and education is getting lesser and lesser. Every time I meet the academics, in fact, I have Laurent Jacques from Fletcher School of Diplomacy, who are our partners at the Bharati Institute of Public Policy in India. He says the professors teach 120 hours a year, and they want to teach less. I said, can you just understand, and can you explain this to me? And I know, all 4 of you are going to take cudgels against me, but the matter of fact is I'm just trying to, bring a perspective from a practitioner side. You get paid top dollars. On top of that, you also get money for research and funding for research. But you want to teach 80 hours a year. It's a dichotomy. Now, I really don't know what is the right model. I think in India, the hours are more than what it is. Okay, yeah. Sure. So clearly there is a disconnect. What we need to look at is, on the curriculum and content, future of innovations, and accordingly the curriculum need to come in. The future of technologies, the Internet of Things, the robotics, AR, VR, artificial intelligence, and so on. And as Deepak mentioned, yes, we have applied for the Institute of Eminence. We are setting up the Satya Bharati University, which will provide degrees in electrical and electronics, computer sciences, management, and humanities, but with a very high focus on the future technologies. With one big difference, that we will be teaching the underprivileged children for free. I think that is a commitment which the family has made. We made a giving pledge of $1.1 billion. And by no means it will be back of the yard campus or back of the yard university. We will get the best faculty from the world. We will get the best infrastructure. And I think more importantly, what I'm looking at is very heavy focus on research even at the undergraduate level. I think that is something which is of great importance. And I believe, if I quote, I read that today morning, the only source of knowledge is experience. And I believe India, ASEAN have synergies, countries, universities, and I think the time has come when we need to sit together, leverage each other's strengths, and benefit from that, and more importantly, prepare the young minds for a better tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, Dr. Varaprasad.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's so encouraging for me to see the house being full in this room today. I'm really amazed that so many of you want to hear about education, science, and research instead of business and arts and writing. So thank you for coming, because it makes our time here more worthwhile. For me, being the fifth speaker is a big challenge. It's quite similar to the challenge faced by Elizabeth Taylor's fifth husband. How to say the same things but make it more interesting. I just want to pick up a couple of points about the theme that has been discussed so far. First of all, we have been discussing about ASEAN-India collaboration, cooperation in education, science, research, technology, and so on. But let me make this point, that we cannot talk about excellence in higher education or excellence in research unless you have excellence in school education. You must have a level playing field for every child, right from the very beginning, from grade 1, if possible even before grade 1. It's only when every child has access to good primary and secondary and high school education, and allow each and every one of them to realize their potential, that we can identify the best to be in universities, to be in research, and then to talk about innovation and technology and so on, because technology and innovation is not limited to a small number. It has to have access to the largest number, not the smallest number. We've also been hearing a lot about the demographic dividend, the challenge of an opportunity of demographic dividend for India. Let me say that the greatest danger that we are facing, as mentioned by a couple of my colleagues here, is jobless growth, not only due to automation, disruption, technology, and AI, but also to the rise of the gig economy, the sharing economy, where freelancing has become mainstream, not just because of Uber and Grab and other types of sharing, but also people becoming consultants, selling their own skills, marketing themselves, as individuals. So this creates a big challenge for us in education. What are you training for? What skills are you training for? We hear a lot about soft skills and hard skills and skills for the 21st century, but what are these? It depends on who you ask. Every time you ask somebody, you get a new set of answers because the demands keep changing. So each one of us has to identify what is our unique skill that people will pay for. What is your unique strength? What is your unique passion? What is the strength that you bring to the table? And the 21st century skill, the soft skills, is about evidence seeking, fact checking, validation, verification, testing, calibration, is to be able to separate opinion from fact and fact from fiction. It's amazing today the things that people will believe on social media. And it's changing our whole culture of trust and our whole culture of what we believe in and what we really think is true. Hard skills. I believe hard skills can be taught in a just-in-time fashion, possibly by corporates or with public-private partnerships. Because today, whatever skill you need, whatever knowledge you need is already readily available. There's nothing that you can't find by yourself. If I want to fix something, I'm able to Google it and find out. So you only need to know what you need to know just before you need to know it, just in time. We don't need to preload the poor student with everything that he needs to know just in case, which is what we're doing now. The image of an examination room with 1,000 students, each in a separate table, is not a vision of the future. Is that the way that people are going to work? No. People work in teams, people work together. People solve problems in non-routine issues. It's not the routine, regular work that we need to be good at. We need to be very good at non-routine, non-predictable cognitive activity, interpersonal activity. We meet people who are not the same every day. We meet different people from different cultures, different skills. How do we work and interact with them? Those are the skills that we need to train. Right from where? Right from school. Right from school, right before they reach university. It's a great pity that if you look at the figures, only 38% of university graduates are deemed to be employable by Indian corporates. That is a massive waste of talent. Now we come to the ASEAN part of it. You know, in 2015, ASEAN launched the ASEAN Economic Community. And part of the ASEAN Economic Community's goals is free flow of goods, free flow of services, and free flow of labor. And this is the scariest part for us. Let me tell you, this is the scariest part, because if India and ASEAN were to have free flow of labor, what would happen to ASEAN? This is why it's so difficult to get mutual recognition of qualifications. Because even within ASEAN itself, we are taking baby steps to mutually recognize each other's qualifications. It is strange that we can only work with public universities. We can't work with private universities. We can only work with public universities. But in many countries, as Professor Deepak Jain said, the best universities are not public, they are private. So we are taking baby steps. But to move this to the next level, which is the goal of collaboration and cooperation, which is talent and labor mobility, how do we get there? Is that the final outcome that we're looking for? And if labor mobility is what we are looking for, then how do we raise our standards? And how do we raise our standards of schooling, our standards of technical education, our standards of skills development, not only of higher education? So in order to get excellence in higher education and research and technology, I suggest very strongly that we should be looking at a much broader base to bring everybody into the realm of good education so that each can find his unique passion, his unique skill, his unique special contribution to the world at large. So we can take our discussion from there in the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Ambitiously, I thought that with 5 Indians, we'd have a good 30 minutes to speak, but like good Indians, we've all stretched our time. So we have, given the time, about 10 minutes, really. I'm going to beg the organizers to give us another 5, depending on how it goes from the floor, because I think we started slightly late. So I'm going to stand here because there's a chunk of the audience I just can't see. I believe they're roving mics, so if anybody has a question or comment, particularly on the issue of what India and ASEAN can do together, I think we've thrown out some spores, each of us, on what that could be. But if the audience would like to try and get us to focus more. So I'll begin in the beginning with the gentleman here, and then, where's the mic? Can you take the mic here?
Hi, this is a question that was kind of followed by the last talk. Now it's like lifelong learning and just-in-time learning for any student. Would it be more appropriate for the students to do work and study from 7th grade, if not earlier, onwards, rather than just dumping them all the things at once? So that way they pick up the skills, what they need, and apply, and then go from there, rather than just waiting till undergrad to complete.
Okay, so that's for Varaprasad. I'll take 2 or 3 so that I think we have Mr. G-Boy here somewhere. Did you have your hand up? Yeah, mic here.
Hello.
Okay.
Is it okay?
Yeah, go ahead, and then we'll have Mr. G-Boy.
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to get view from the panels on the 2 aspects. One, when you mentioned jobless growth and specifically focuses on youth, have you thought about silver tsunami? How are we going to use education, research, science and technology for creating value for the silver tsunami people? Okay, means those who are retiring and maybe becoming freelancers, how we can use their services to enhance education. Second part, just quickly one, that when we say research, what is the view of the panel that how we can produce, say maybe equivalent of Nobel Prize winners from the universities, why we don't see their names coming in those lists? What is it lacking in our university education that can help that? Thank you.
Okay, we got a question at this
Good
table.
afternoon. Yeah.
I thought I was the boss, but I guess I'm not. All right.
So I have a question here.
Where are you? I can't.
I'm
The
here.
lights are right in my. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, let's go ahead, and then we'll come back to the panel with from that one. Go ahead.
So my name is Mahalakshmi, and I'm a recent graduate of Chinese politics from Shanghai. And it's an open-ended question for the panel. So my observation is that on the one hand, we have a push for globalization. And on the other hand, we are closing in, or we are seeing a rising nationalism emerging in all the countries. So this has begun affecting scholarships, funding, exchange of scholars and students. So given this kind of a scenario, how does one go ahead with collaborations and rising partnerships in the educational domain? Thank you.
Okay, I think I'll take a first round very quickly. I think Varaprasad, the first one was to you about lifelong learning. So
Yes, the question was about a work-study model And I certainly think, yes, the work, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, the work-study model, I would support it after grade 10 rather than before grade 10. I also think that in school, it's very useful if students are exposed to a variety of experiences in arts, in sports, in technology, in robotics, in photography, in writing, in painting, and so on and so forth, a wide range of opportunities for them to see what excites them, to see what they are good at and what interests they have. And this way, I feel that they can not necessarily all move up the same way to the next stage of their life and next stage of education. Let them figure out what are the things they like to do best, what they enjoy doing. And that way, they can select a career, select a path that energizes them, not to do something because their parents or their peers and everyone else follows down the line. In Singapore, we have this phenomenon of doctors leaving their careers and lawyers leaving their careers in order to make muffins and cupcakes. It's a very strange phenomenon. And then after 1 or 2 years of losing money, they go on to something else. So it's much better if they can find much earlier on. So I do support a work-study program where they can try out different experiences. So they can figure out, is industry what they want? Is business what they want? Is entrepreneurship what they want? Is coding what they want? But in order to do this, let them have these experiences in school. Another point about the silver tsunami, very quickly, it's very strange that in India, we're talking about upskilling or reskilling and skilling the young so that they can get jobs. Whereas in Singapore, we are at the other end of the spectrum because we're thinking of reskilling the older workers who are losing their jobs due to technological disruption, and also reskilling the aged so that they can live well and independently and in good health. So we are looking at the post-50s and 60s and 70s, and the government is giving money into personal accounts to make that happen. Whereas in India, we're looking at how do we give skills, hard skills, to a huge number of people, 400 million at the target for 2022.
Mr. Mittal, do you want to take on the one about Nobel Prize winners? How can India and ASEAN countries really create the conditions for really brilliant minds to flourish?
Well, I think before that, Kanti, if I may just quickly add to what you just mentioned. I think big things has happened in the school education in India. 2,500 labs have come up in schools with all the future technologies from class 5 onwards so that the children are getting trained. The second is from class 9 onwards, vocational training has become part of the curriculum. So you can be employable and employability after class 12. So that's something which we are doing. On the Nobel Prize, my view is very simple. Unshackle the education sector and give complete freedom to the educational institutions with private sector playing a large role. Because unless we do that, we will keep on talking. Having said that, there are few Indians who went out, they got Nobel Prize. So while the government is spending a lot of money on educating young Indians, someone else reaps the benefit. I think the time has come when we need to say, what can we do for India? What can we do for ASEAN as a region together? And ultimately, it is going to boil down to education is the key. You cannot have Nobel Prize winners on the back of illiterate people. So I think that's extremely important.
Deepak, in a globalizing world, but also in a nationalistic world, what happens to funding? I mean, are India and ASEAN going to keep their borders open and encourage foreigners to come who are talented, or are we going to restrict our funding to just our own nationals? How do you see it? Oh, sorry, Deepak.
Yes.
It's my birthday
So-
today. I'm a little distracted. Yeah.
So let me touch on this thing in a slightly different way. We all in this room are here for one reason, and that is our parents' dedication on education. I remember when we were growing up, there was no concept of family vacation. All the money they saved was to give children the best education. So if we are the result of what we have seen, I think it is very important for us as parents to make sure that we give the best environment for our children to flourish. And if you allow me, I just give you one point, because that question that you raised, I have 3 children. My daughter goes in 6th grade in Chicago. She gets an assignment from the teacher that if the school gives you $1 million, what would you do with it? Come up with a business plan, 6th grade. My daughter came to me and I said, what would you like to do? She says she has a passion for a vegetarian restaurant. And so I said, I will introduce you to a restaurant owner. She wrote a plan, very nice. My son comes in 6th grade, gets the same assignment. I asked him, what would you like to do? He says, Papa, I would like to travel in first class around the world and spend $1 million, right? And that's fine. Now, boys are boys. So I said that do one thing, create a nice travel agency where you can create around the world thing, and he wrote a very nice plan. My youngest daughter comes to the same thing, 6th grade, and she's more in music, and she wants to create a music school to teach dancing, Indian classical dancing and others. What I mean to say is in US, it's right at the seed of the 6th grade where this concept of entrepreneurialism is generated among students. And they learn how to write a business plan at that age. So our education system, what Mr. Mittal was saying is, we need to promote that concept rather than the Indian education being a system of repetition. We teach how well you can replicate it in the classroom is how you get the grades. So that shift has to come. And to answer your question in that thing, the government and what you said, I very big believe that we need to be less controlled by the Ministry of Education, not in a negative way, but let the children, the teachers, and the parents also play a big role in shaping what I call the passage of education. And time has come. We, as Indians, have excelled because of our educational excellence. Now, you talked about business relevance, and I think the next phase would be social significance. What you said, how we make a difference for the underprivileged in terms of giving them the best education and the best platform. So I think the best days of India are ahead of us. I really believe that.
We're out of time almost, but I think there are quite a number of hands on this side. So I'm just going to take 2 questions. Yes, one right there, and one here.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, yes, you had. So first you in the hat, and then the gentleman who's standing there, and then that'll be.
I'll just go back to the whole idea of that ASEAN and India has some of the youngest people on the planet, and a large number of them. So isn't this a good time? Okay, I'll introduce myself. I am a founder of a talent discovery company. So it does relate a lot to what we are doing already. So we've had an education system for the last 500 years, which was probably designed for the old industrial revolution, which is throwing information at kids from a very early age, all types of information, and then just waiting for them to, become good at something, right? If you take the example of, say, sports, okay, there exists a system in American baseball where you do talent scouting from the age of 7, and anybody who can actually play baseball well, they are discovered. Whereas mathematics, which actually runs the world, nobody tries to discover mathematical talent at age 7, 8, 9, 10. And so why don't we have an education system? This is a good time for ASEAN and India to leapfrog and make a different system, which is talent-based rather than information-based. So when you say that you've got unemployable people later on, that's also because most people are getting trained in things that they're actually not good at.
Okay, I think we've got the broad thrust, since we're running out of time. Sorry to, the last
Okay.
word.
Yeah, in India, after independence, for a decade, India has created a number of institutions like the NIT, the IITs, even the All India Institute of Medical Science. So most of the top institutes are run by the government and created by the government. Okay, presently, we don't have much of the private universities which is playing a greater role. And most of the students who are produced from these institutions are going to the Western world. The ASEAN countries are not able to attract them for the jobs or anything. So how do you do that? That is number one question. And number two is, how is the privatization can help, since already the government is doing so well in India in creating the IITians, the NITians, the All India Institute of Medical Science producing 80% of them are in abroad. Just be aware of that. And can you answer to this, please? Thank you.
Okay, I think the questions weren't to anyone specific.
Okay.
One question here, sir.
It's quite entrepreneurial of you to
Yes.
shout from the floor. Go ahead. Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Good afternoon, sir. Professors and doctors. Thank you very much. Okay, my question is, how far the digital revolution initiated and created will become a contributing factor for the mankind? Taking into consideration the political dynamics, democracy, poverty, and a percentage of illiterates, social problem in the context of ASEAN in India. What is the point? Millions of poor people, farmers, working class people, millions of youth involved in social problems, access to handphone, internet without better education. Okay. My concern is any revolution without good values is the highest hypocrisy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. No, I think I'm afraid we really ran out of time. I've got to give it to the panel to answer, and then I will get the guillotine. So sorry about that. But okay, let me ask. The first question was on sort of a talent search for young people. Can't we organize that? Maybe I'll ask Varaprasad to say something about that, since you talked about schools.
My answer is, by all means, go ahead. It's a private sector initiative. Search for the best talent, train them up. If people are willing to pay for such elitist education, so be it. There's no objection.
Yeah.
I don't see why the public sector should support necessarily with a lot of funds, but if it's a private sector initiative, they can do what they want.
The private sector leads a search for talent in things like
Absolutely,
mathematics.
absolutely.
Okay, seems to be a reasonable thought. I think you led, Mr. Mittal, the thought that the government should get out of the way, but I think the import of the second question was that the government does in fact have a role to play, and one needs a balance. So what's that balance, and where do you come out? I mean, where does the government do it the best work in terms of education? Where should it get out?
To my mind, government needs to put a policy system in place with a transparent regulatory and monitoring mechanism. That is what the government must do, because otherwise it'll be free for all. Having said that, once we have done that, then you must give freedom for educational institutions, whether at the school or higher education level, to innovate the methodology of teaching, looking at into pedagogy, what you need to do, skilling and upskilling of the faculty. I have not heard any faculty going for a training program. In the private sector, all my professionals go for a training program and they continue to do so.
Yep.
But the professors say, well, we are untrainable. I mean, we don't need any training. So the point I'm trying to say here is that when you put something in a straitjacket in a regulation, it kills innovation. It kills freedom to look at different ways of delivering education. So I'm not saying that the government has no role to play. By all means, government has a huge role to play. And there are some public institutions all over the world, including India, who are excelling in education. I mean, they're doing wonderfully well. So it's not that it's something which you can, with the same brush, say that this is right or that is wrong. The point we need to look at here is, right from the schooling education, how can you ignite the young mind to start thinking? That's the world of tomorrow. When you get into a university, it's a 4 or 5 year degree program. What will you do after 5 years is not what you are taught today. You need to be teaching what he or she needs after 5 years.
Yeah. Final question, Deepak, would you like to take on the issue of digitalism? It's coming, but in what will it do to us that perhaps is very challenging socially, politically, economically?
So, I have a very simple rule in life. Soft skills create hard impressions. This whole concept of if you are what you are good can be digitized, you would become irrelevant. Or this automation and others would do. So when we teach, and I really emphasize the social skills, the people skills, because digital is only going to enable you to do work more efficiently. I don't think it would substitute the human touch. And in order to enhance productivity, we still need tools beyond the digital side. And that's where I really believe that digital would help us achieve more than what we can do today, but still we need to make sure that we still keep the torch burning of human touch. And I think that is still going to be, and particularly for we Indians, we are good at that. That's the reason why there are so many Indians now deans of business schools in US, because we have this concept of caring attitude, and students can see that. And so I admire the digital part, but let's not get carried away with that.
Okay, I think we're going to leave it there. I think my colleagues have done a great job in giving us I guess, a better sense of what's happening in India educationally. We didn't perhaps hear as much about what might be happening in ASEAN. Also, perhaps we've thrown out some thoughts about what both India and ASEAN, what are the kinds of educational challenges, science and technology challenges, learning challenges, curricular challenges, research challenges, what India and ASEAN can do together. I think looking at that array of challenges is still something that I would ask all of you to think about. Thank you very much for coming, and sorry we went a little over time, but it's time for tea, and please join me in thanking my colleagues as well.